Hello, beautiful communities. I apologize being late because I've only, just for health reasons, managed to take a look at J.D. Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference. I'm going to give you an off-the-cuff reaction, and I'm afraid to say it's going to be more big picture and deeper than probably the reactions you've come across, and I'm disappointed to say that. Now, you would have heard a lot about what a disgrace Vance is to lecture us about democracy, given that he is on board with an authoritarian post-truth anti-institutional project, and what a disgrace he is to play down the role of Russian interference, and what a disgrace he is to not mention Ukraine a single time. Now, that's sloganizing. We want analysis. So let's get a little bit of analysis, because I think it's actually an historic speech. And it's a speech that's not so much historic because of what Vance said, but because it's a concentration of the changing themes in US foreign policy and in Western domestic politics, and the changing theme in historical moments. We're transitioning from one historical moment to another. Before I say anything, I'm going to say something a little bit basic and predictable, but maybe heartbreaking. A lot of you feel lost about all of this stuff. It's partly why we're talking, actually. Because a lot of the most beautiful and sophisticated people are feeling lost about this. Not in the sense that they feel things are going badly, but they feel that things are going a bit unintelligibly, like this is ceasing to make sense. What on earth is happening to our politics? And that's one of the most understandable impulses, and nobody should be criticized for that, certainly not as a private citizen. But the political elites that we have, in particular, most representatives of technocratically centrist governments in Europe and in North America, are also lost. Not concerned that things are going badly, but lost. Finding what's happening a bit unintelligible. Lost like you. And I'm less kind here to this as an historical phenomena, although I am kind to the particular individuals. It's not proportionate for our political elite to be lost in this historical moment. It's a moment of significant upheaval and transformation, but it's not so radical that an adequate political elite should be lost. And one of the reasons they are lost is that they are, in relative historical terms, of low quality. And that's partly why we've ended up in this situation to begin with. That's not directly a critique of the people out there doing their best, but it's certainly an observation of the fact that a lot of the best people at that sort of thing are increasingly less interested at doing that sort of thing. And so we have a situation where there are people who are not lost, but they're profoundly unlikely to end up in politics. Often for understandable reasons, but that's the truth. So many of our political elites are lost too. They don't get what's happening. And we've got to be real about that, and the fact that that's quite alarming. Because they can't win on your behalf unless they stop feeling lost. Bottom line, right? They'll just keep losing to authoritarian populists. They don't have to, in principle, but they're on track to across most of the West. Now Vance's speech. I think there are two historical trends that the speech illustrates. The first trend is US withdrawal from the world. And the second trend is that some of the legitimate criticism that needs to be made of our politics is not being made by responsible actors, but is being made nearly exclusively by irresponsible actors who are far more destructive in their political conduct than the conduct of technocratic centrist governments which they're criticizing. That's an important historical moment that we're in. That is a very important trend. inarticulacy by responsible political forces about our problems, and exploitation of our problems by irresponsible political forces who get the issue better but are offering toxic solutions. So if these are the two trends, what are the key moments in Vance's speech that touched on these important historical trends? I found 3 moments important. The first is the repeated emphasis of the speech, this was just the main theme of the speech, that public discourse has been unduly constricted in Western democracies, and it needs to go from here to here. That's my visualization of it. And only that will give the possibility for governments across the West to reconnect with their citizens with whose concerns and feelings on the doorstep they've lost touch. So Vance spoke to an actually real crisis of legitimacy, where, just to take a banal example, we've got a Labour government in the UK that is out, despite its large majority, is out of touch with the country and doesn't know how to get back in touch with the country. And the party that's doing nearly best in the polls is a somewhat post-truth authoritarian, or at least right populist party, Reform. And the government can't do anything about it, and the government is in a dynamic of a legitimacy crisis with the UK population. The UK population feels like they're unheard on a set of key issues by the government. This is ubiquitous, this is happening across the West. And Vance, in that speech, made a couple of, now his examples might need to be fact-checked, and I won't legislate on that, and they need to be debunked. But the point is that the broad theme is actually gesturing toward a problem that's real. But there is a big but, which is that Vance is making, at least in principle, legitimate critique of where our societies are at. But he's doing it from the vantage point of being on a political project, in a political project that is anti-institutional, anti-constitutional, post-truth, full of denial of legitimate election results, now contains threats against the territorial integrity of US neighbors, and even contains attacks that are all about constricting the free participation, association, and free speech of various bodies, including journalistic bodies. So the hypocrisy there is staggering, and it's clear that whatever the state of that legitimacy crisis in Western polities, Vance's political project is parasitical upon that issue and is only there to make it worse. So that's one important element of the speech. It was a request for expansion of public discourse to alleviate the legitimacy crisis, but it was delivered from the vantage point of a political project that is much worse than the disease that's being critiqued here. Now, the second thing that stuck out was not a single mention of Ukraine. And here what's interesting is that even if Vance weren't a political chancer, if he were speaking from the vantage point of a responsible political project, what he said would still have not worked because it didn't concern itself, even though he did talk about this in other parts of the day, but I'm leaving that out now, didn't concern himself with security, international security in Europe. And if your target are centrist technocrats who have lost touch with their populations and need to be awakened here, you need to talk about some of the central concerns you're expected to deliver some comment on and not just ignore them. And in ignoring these concerns, the functional default of the speech became that it got to seem like an address to an American audience and to populist, authoritarian, post-truth audiences in Europe. So he delivered the speech as an irresponsible chancer, but even if he wasn't an irresponsible chancer, that speech wouldn't have made sense on its own terms, because to deliver it to the target audience, he also needed to talk about security, and he didn't. And then the third moment that stuck out in the speech is about the comparison of Greta with Elon Musk. So he said, look, Greta Thunberg's comments have irritated Americans over a couple of years, and we've coped with it. So you Europeans can cope with irritating comments by Elon Musk. There are several disanalogies there, and I'll just mention one of them. Greta doesn't have political power. Musk has, along several dimensions, from his running of X to his role in the Trump administration, to his enormous investment in the victory of the Trump campaign. Along several dimensions, Musk holds enormous power of questionable legitimacy. And the fact that that comparison is made exposes the hypocrisy of Vance's entire speech, because it's a critique of the blindness of technocratic centrist politics in Europe that could have been legitimate if Vance had made it from outside politics, but he makes it from inside politics and from an exploitative, anti-institutional, and irresponsible political project. And that constellation of an important point made with bad examples and grotesque self-refuting irresponsibility is a really important historical element of that speech, because it demonstrates how some of the biggest challenges we face are only articulately engaged with by the most irresponsible actors in Western politics. That's one historical theme. The other historical theme is US retreat. And as I say, the three key moments are Greta, no mention of Ukraine, and this persistent message about going like that. But it's a request to go like that by somebody who is involved in a political project that's incompatible with constructive politics. Lots of love.